April 5th, 1933. You wake up, open the newspaper, and read that the President of the United States has just made it a federal crime to own gold. You have 26 days to hand yours over to the government at whatever price they decide to pay you. Refuse? 10 years in prison. This wasn't Nazi Germany. This wasn't Soviet Russia. This was America. And almost nobody teaches it. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most shocking and honestly misunderstood moments in U.S. history. We're talking about Executive Order 6102. Literally, the day the United States government forced its own citizens to surrender their physical wealth. It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, right? But it happened right here. So how on earth did we get to a point where a fundamental right to own precious metals was suddenly outlawed? Well, to figure that out, we have to go back to the beginning. Section 1. The Great Depression Panic. To really wrap our heads around how the government felt completely justified in pulling off a massive confiscation of private property, we have to look at the absolute unraveling of the American landscape between 1929 and 1933. The world Americans were living in back then, it was completely falling apart. It was a perfect storm for unprecedented government action. By 1933, the unemployment rate hit a staggering 24.9%. Now, just for some context, in 1929, that number was sitting at a mere 3.2%. So in just a few short years, 1 in 4 American workers had completely lost their livelihoods. Just overnight. Imagine that. Families were losing their homes left and right, massive bustling factories were just going totally dark, and literally giant tent cities were springing up across the nation just to shelter the newly destitute. It was incredibly bleak. Okay, let's dive into this cascading collapse. The American economy was actively being hollowed out from the inside. Real GDP shrank by a devastating 29%. And consumer prices, they plummeted by 25% in this vicious deflationary spiral. And look, deflation is terrifying. When people expect prices to just keep falling tomorrow, what do? They stop spending today. That causes businesses to fail, which causes more unemployment, which causes even less spending. It's an endless doom loop. And amidst all this absolute economic terror, over 10,763 banks completely failed. Just imagine the sheer panic of walking down the street, going to withdraw your life savings so you can feed your family, only to find the bank doors chained locked forever. Your money completely gone. Poof. Now, here is where the mechanics of the system actually became the enemy. At the time, America was operating on the gold standard, so every paper dollar was legally backed by physical gold, and the Federal Reserve was legally required to hold gold reserves equal to at least 40% of the currency they issued. Because people were absolutely terrified of bank failures, everyday citizens were doing something entirely rational. They were pulling their paper dollars out of the banking system and exchanging them for physical gold. They wanted real money they could actually hold in their own hands. But here is the fatal flaw in that entire system. Every single ounce of gold that left the government vaults legally forced the Federal Reserve to shrink the paper money supply even further. It was a vicious cycle. Rational individuals, just trying to protect their wealth, were unintentionally pushing the entire national monetary system toward total collapse. Section 2. Executive Order 6102. So this cascading banking crisis, this absolute nightmare, was the terrifying reality Franklin D. Roosevelt inherited when he was inaugurated on March 4th, 1933. And he wasted absolutely no time. Literally just 36 hours into his presidency, he declared a national bank holiday. He shut down every single bank in the country just to freeze the panic. Days later, Congress passed the Emergency Banking Act, which allowed FDR to tap into a 1917 World War I law called the Trading with the Enemy Act. Think about that for a second. He was now using a wartime emergency power directly against the American people. And then came April 5th, 1933, when FDR officially signed Executive Order 6102. It demanded that all Americans, individuals and businesses alike, surrender their gold coins, bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve within just 26 days. There were very few exemptions. You could keep up to $100 in face value, which was about 4.8 troy ounces, along with some rare collectible coins and gold used for professional practices, like dentistry or jewelry making. But everything else, it had to go. The government paid a fixed forced rate of $20.67 per troy ounce. But here's the kicker. This wasn't some friendly suggestion. It wasn't a patriotic request. It was a strict, hard-line federal mandate backed by brutal criminal penalties. If you willfully violated the order and decided to hide your gold, you face up to 10 years in federal prison. And on top of that, a $10,000 fine. If we anchor that to modern dollars, that is a penalty of roughly $249,000 today. $250,000 and a decade behind bars simply for holding onto your own savings in the form of a precious metal. It's honestly mind-blowing when you put it into modern perspective. Section 3. Compliance and Consequences. Faced with those terrifying consequences, what did Americans actually do? Well, the truth is, the vast majority of people complied. Millions handed over their gold out of a mixture of deep trust in Roosevelt, genuine patriotic duty to help save the collapsing country, and, frankly, sheer fear of those massive penalties. But not everyone went along with it. A few citizens actively resisted. Enter Frederick Barber Campbell. Campbell was a New York attorney who had deposited over 5,000 ounces of gold at Chase National Bank. When he tried to withdraw his own property after the order was issued, the bank refused. So what does a lawyer do? Campbell sued the bank. But the very next day, a federal prosecutor fired back and indicted him. Ultimately, a federal judge threw out the criminal prosecution on a minor legal technicality, something about who specifically signed the order. But here's the true crime kicker. The court still completely upheld the government's underlying authority to confiscate the gold. So Campbell's 5,000 ounces were seized anyway. He avoided federal prison, sure, but he lost his wealth entirely. The message to the American public was crystal clear. The government was playing for keeps, and your private property was no longer truly yours. Section 4. The billion-dollar revaluation. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the actual physical confiscation of the gold was really only step 1. What happened 9 months later reveals the true financial motive behind the order, and it's a piece of history that still sparks intense debate today. Just 9 months after forcing everyday Americans to sell their gold at $20.67 per ounce under the threat of prison, Congress passed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. Immediately after, Roosevelt officially revalued gold to $35 an ounce. Let's trace these mechanics carefully because this is wild. Citizens are forced to sell their assets incredibly low. Once the government has all the assets, they instantly hike the price by 69%. And because the dollar was still tied to gold globally, that meant the paper dollars the citizens received for their confiscated gold were instantly devalued in purchasing power. It was effectively a double-hit wealth transfer from everyday citizens directly to the state. As a direct result of this instant price manipulation, the federal government booked a staggering overnight profit of $2.8 billion. To put that into perspective, in today's money, that is the equivalent of a $65 billion windfall. Think about that for a second. The wealth didn't just vanish into thin air. It was forcibly transferred from the pockets of private citizens straight into the vaults of the U.S. Treasury, specifically to fund the government's massive new spending programs. It was a massive financial sleight of hand. And before we move on, there's an absolutely incredible footnote to this whole event: the 1933 double eagle gold coin. When the confiscation order came down, all gold coin production stopped dead in its tracks, and the newly minted 1933 dated coins were ordered to be melted down and destroyed. But a few mysteriously slipped out of the mint. For decades, possessing one of these coins made you a criminal, subject to Secret Service arrest and federal prosecution. Fast forward to 2002, and one of these surviving coins, legalized through a highly complex diplomatic loophole, sold at public auction for over $7.5 million. A single coin, ordered destroyed by the government, ended up becoming one of the most valuable pieces of currency on the planet. The irony is just off the charts. Section 5. The 41-year gold ban. Now, you might be thinking this was just a brief emergency measure to get through the absolute worst years of the Great Depression, right? Nope. It became a multi-generational restriction on American economic freedom. Gold was confiscated in 1933. It was revalued for government profit in 1934. It took nearly 4 decades and massive global economic shifts until President Nixon completely abandoned the gold standard in 1971. That finally severed the tie entirely, turning the U.S. dollar into a pure fiat currency. And it wasn't until December 31st, 1974, under President Gerald Ford, that the right of everyday Americans to freely own gold bullion was finally legally restored. That is an astounding 41 years where owning significant quantities of the world's oldest form of money was a serious federal crime in the United States. An entire generation grew up not even knowing what it was like to hold physical gold. And this brilliantly illustrates the long-term cost to the families who surrendered their wealth. Forced to sell at $20.67 in 1933, they had to sit by helplessly and watch as gold eventually spiked to $850 an ounce by 1980, just a few years after legalization. And today, it trades at around $3,000 an ounce. Those who complied with the government order missed out on decades of incredible financial appreciation, all while watching the paper currency they received slowly lose its purchasing power due to creeping inflation over the exact same period. It's a tough pill to swallow when you really look at the math. Section 6. What it means today. Which naturally leads us to the biggest question. Could a dramatic confiscation of private assets like this happen again today? It's what everyone asks. Well, most legal and monetary experts argue that a direct repeat of 1933 is highly unlikely. The core reason is that the architecture of our money is completely different now. Back in 1933, we were on a gold standard. The government had a strict, binding legal obligation to back currency with physical gold, meaning public withdrawals were causing a literal systemic collapse of the banking system. Today, we operate on a pure fiat currency system. The government can print dollars digitally at will without needing a single ounce of gold in a vault to back it up. Because of that, there is no mechanical, monetary reason for the government to send federal agents to seize your physical gold today. So, the crucial point is this. While the exact monetary mechanics have changed, human history and the nature of government authority definitely have not. The story of 1933 proves that during periods of extreme national panic, governments can and will fundamentally rewrite the rules of personal wealth. They used emergency powers to completely redefine what was legal, turning everyday patriotic savers into potential felons literally overnight. Understanding this isn't about paranoia, It's about deep historical awareness. It's about realizing that the relationship between the state, the national money supply, and your private property is far more fragile and subject to change than we often assume. So ask yourself this. If the architecture of our money shifts again in the future, how secure is the wealth you hold today? It's definitely something to think about. Never be surprised by history. If you found this dive into hidden history valuable, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. It really helps the channel grow.